Personality-wise, he was just so kind, so gracious, so interested in everyone. Anyone that had contact with him came to talk to him about something. And then as a professor, he was just superb. He would come into class and begin with a little reminder on the board of what we covered yesterday. Then he'd go into the lesson of the day. And then the next day the same. A bit of a review of the past. He made it easy to learn. Easy to learn. And I didn't find out till much later, that he actually tore up his own notes at the end of every school year, so that he would be forced to start again and integrate the new things he had read and studied in his own personal study. So he was a marvelous teacher, but also he came across as a friend. Years later, when he was transferred to Rome and elected to assistant general over there, he just loved people. So although his Italian was very, very poor and he was just starting, he didn't have Spanish and so on, he'd be around talking to them all with that smile of his, enjoying their company, encouraging them in his own way, both the priests, the brothers, and the sisters who helped in our community. He was a great man, marvelous teacher, but above all was his example. He was just a totally devoted Passionist, whether it was on the solitary walk, the gardens, and so on. Man of prayer, constant prayer, you could tell that. And that spirit of his just came from his heart, and a sincere interest as the Lord taught us in one another.
Universally admired by members of his province, as a teacher and spiritual director, Father Theodore was made Superior of St. Paul's Monastery, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1956. In 1958, Theodore was elected General Consultor of the Worldwide Passionist Community headquartered in Rome. In 1964, he was elected their Superior General. The last period of Theodore's life was the most demanding of all for him. The Passionists were growing as a worldwide community. During Theodore's term as consultor, the congregation grew rapidly in Asia, Africa, and South America. In 1968, as Superior General, he saw the community reach its peak membership of 4,152 religious. Much of his time was spent visiting faraway houses and members, presiding at provincial chapters, settling questions and difficulties that arose among the religious, and representing the interests of the congregation in Rome. It took long hours of travel, correspondence, and patient listening, which engaged him for 16 years. These years were not ordinary years. He arrived in Rome while the community was still dealing with the aftermath of World War II. And then, in the 1960s and 70s, the Western world entered a period of turbulent social unrest. Youth protests, political confrontations, assassinations, anti-establishment, and anti-war demonstrations shook Western society. Violence erupted in the large cities of America and elsewhere. Traditional values were called into question. Church membership declined. Uncertainty increased. The Second Vatican Council, called by Pope John XXIII, raised the promise of new energy and hope, but the times were marked by great confusion and division. Theodore Foley brought to these times a holiness that's needed when everything is falling apart.
Our Theodore, man of the people, man who loved people, very bright man, but always humble. We are just so proud of him. And we look at him and say he was a holy man. That's the big thing. That's how he could put all of this together. People came to the door, people in need, people hungry, people asking for money, whatever it was, people asking to be blessed, the sick and the hurting. He was there to help them. You've heard that at the end of his life he came down with an illness. He had been traveling through the world on visitations, stopped in Springfield. That was his last visit, to visit his sister and his Aunt Caroline. And then he made his way back to Rome, but went right into the hospital. It turned out he had acquired some disease of the lungs principally, and the heart, and so on, that weakened the heart. The pressure was sort of a virus or something that he had picked up and been carrying. He knew he wasn't feeling well. So he was in the hospital, and just at that time our order had what we call a synod, an assembly. And so our provincial father, Flavian Doherty at the time, and I were called to that synod. So when we got to Rome, Theodore was in the hospital, had been there about a month by that time, but he wasn't allowed to have any visitors except the assistant general. And every night about 9 o'clock, of course some had snuck over in between, but every night about 9 o'clock the vicar general would come back from the evening visit to Father Theodore in the hospital and give us a little report. And on this particular night, he said to, Vicar General said that Father Theodore is still very, very weak, but the doctors are doing the best they can, and that he sends his love to all of us. He was more interested in us and telling us not to be worried about him. He was doing as well as he could do. And then that Vicar General called me aside that evening and said, Father Norbert, Father Theodore would like to see you tomorrow morning. And he told me to tell you that even if they tell you he's not to have visitors, he wants to see you tomorrow morning. So I was looking forward to that, and we dispersed. And not 15 minutes later, the news came that Theodore had died. Well, it was an enormous shock. We knew he was ill. We knew he was in poor health. We knew he was suffering. They told us his last words were, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I give you my heart and my soul. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Then he passed to the Lord. I was able, because they hadn't considered it, Father Theodore was only the second person to die in office as our Superior General. And so they presumed he was going to be buried in Rome. And I pleaded with our authorities to please let us have our Mass there for him. And which we did, and generals of all the other orders. Father Rupe, the Jesuit general that I remember, was the first in the hospital to visit Theodore before we brought the body into our Basilica of St. John and Paul. So we had the funeral Mass there, and then we brought him home to his beloved sister Marie and to his Aunt Caroline. Those were precious days. But the memory of Theodore, the man of prayer, the man who loved the Lord with his whole heart, loved people, loved to serve people, whatever the class, whatever the condition, he was there for them because he was a priest, because he was a Passionist. May the passion of Jesus Christ be always in our hearts. Thank you.